Okay, so yeah, as Josh was saying, good night for everyone. Sorry that we went through some glitches and that situation, but let's go back to the interesting part, and hopefully we will get some other people back, and then just get the discussion going. We'll have my presentation, and then Dorivar is still here with us, so we probably will have a chance even to have a session of questions and answers. So as the presentation is saying, I will be discussing today about management practices in corn. I'm Ignacio Ciampiti, Farming Systems Professor and Associate Professor in the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University. So just to start, let me go immediately to the first section. We will just go to specifically when you look at corn. I will be focusing on multiple practices. I will try to show some of the main things that we will need to take into consideration. If you look at the yield section, some of the main factors that we need to consider are specifically hybrid selection, what are the different hybrids and maturity, commercial relative maturity depending on the locations, crop rotation, planting date as critical factor in many situations, more if we are in central Kansas. We have some studies on row spacing. There will be much more information on planting systems and row spacing on the next webinar that is coming with the planter system for Dr. Sharda. And then a few focus that we will be talking in this presentation is more about plant density and seeding rate. We'll have also next webinar, Sarah Lancaster, that will be connected and with all of us, and then talking about weed control. Dr. Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz talk about nitrogen and importance of nitrogen fertilization, and then of course connected to weekly scouting as a big critical factor for yield improvement. So here are some of the things that when you're looking at managing your crop are the most relevant that we need to consider. I always start with this, one of the slides that is talking about growth and development all the time. We use this information for our teachers across the state. Kansas Corn has a very active program, STEM program. A lot of the checkoff going to teachers across the state, educating kids, trying to connect them with the local roots and information on corn. And this information has been basic and has been used in multiple settings. So I usually start with this, is a fresh reminder. This is information that produced by Kansas State University. We have all this information available, and you will see in many of the slides that I will be presenting, I will be leaving the link of the information, so you can just look at the link, and then after this presentation will be recorded, so you will have a chance to go back and then get access to this information. So just to start, we all the time we talk about planting day, but specifically in this case, we will focus also on plant density. So planting day has changed over time. If we look at our planting date over time in the last 20, 30 years, today, on average, we are planting corn earlier, okay? And we are seeing that trend that is becoming more and more continuous. When you look at plant density, something similar on the plant density side, today, when you compare the last 3 or 4 decades, we are moving and increasing plant density. And we have a study, we did a review looking at information across the entire Corn Belt, specifically for Kansas, and we look at the different type of information. So in this case, you will see changes in optimal density. So one example is we're going from 1985, changes in optimal plant density went from, on average, close to 300 plants per acre per year. And we went all the way to basically the new planting densities. And of course, someone look at these numbers going from 30 to 38,000, and they will say, well, those are extremely high. Makes sense. These are connected to the yield potential. So if you look at the changes in yield, you will see that those densities that we discussed before are connected with those changes in yield. So the yield has been changed on average for those optimal plant densities when across the 1985 until this time, close to 2.2 bushels per acre per year, okay? So I'm moving from 120 bushels average to all the way closer to 200 bushels per acre for maximum yield. So again, density extremely connected to yield potential and target yield for each of the environments, a key relevant factor. And if you wanted to kind of get a summary, a flavor of what happened in the last couple of decades, here is connected to the review on plant density that we have in corn. You will see that in yellow and purple are the situations that they are the older hybrids. Those older hybrids, they have a very small range in population on density, on optimum. And as we are passing over the optimum, the yields they decline. If you look at the newer hybrids, we have basically the modern hybrids. You see that the range in population and optimal population is much wider, okay? And you see that in those situations, we are moving in plant density, and still it looks like the plant density doesn't change on the yield potential. So from one side, we can say that this situation is giving us something that could be more forgiven, because if we go beyond the optimal, those hybrids, they tend to do very well. And if you look at the older ones, when you are going above the optimal, immediately, as you are putting more plants, the yields start to be depressed. So, and then this is one of the main changes, is very well highlighted in many situations. Couple of things that we also went beyond looking at changes on plant density. We also start looking at changes on yield components. Many times we talk about that one of the main changes on plant density is not only connected to the ability to add more plants and the tolerance to those plants to compete, it's also connected to the kernel number. So today we have years that they have less abortion, okay? One factor that we usually tend to neglect is this one, that is the kernel weight. Most of the times we say, well, kernel weights, probably not much of a change. If you look over time, we have a study looking at hybrids from even the 1920s, the year of release, all the way to new modern hybrids. You see a positive trend on kernel weight, which basically is telling us that we are not only improving that tolerance to plant density, but that tolerance to density is coming together with kernel number improvement and also with kernel weight. So we are basically maintaining the weight of those kernels, and in some cases, as you see on this trend, at equal densities, we are more or less improving that kernel weight over time. These are, I mean, in terms of yield improvement for corn, these are excellent and very positive news. If you look at the picture, this has been taken from collaborations that we have from Pioneer, so studies in multiple sections of the state, looking at different densities, going from very low 9,000 all the way to very high 45,000. Just wanted to highlight, when we talk about optimal densities, not always is a number, okay? This is an example. Here you have a graph from a recent publication. Here it shows the yields in bushels per acre and the response to plant density. What you see are the lines. The white line, light blue, and the blue lines are just the response, and the response clearly show how, as you are changing on yields, that optimal density is changing, but also it shows the variability, and it's something that we never discuss too much. Those sections that they are the gray areas, they show the variability to predict that number. So there is still a lot of variability on how to predict the number, how to become much better on really selecting the right density. So for that, the next steps on things that we're working at this point, we're working on developing more predictions and trying to understand what are the most critical factors, one being the water at planting time and the soil water balance, to try to understand the predictions of plant density. Still very critical topic for corn, still as a seed cost, one of the main factors. So if you want to get some information about, on average, you will see that low yielding environments, when we are looking at less than 100 bushels, we are focusing on less than 20,000 plants. I will show some exciting research on tillering, very short. You will see those numbers also with we were testing 10,000 plants per acre. Medium yield environments, we usually say between 100 and 150 bushels is when densities starts going up, and the optimum is going from 22 to 26,000. Yeah, and when we are moving to high yielding environments is when plant densities start going up, 20,000 to 32. And then of course, when we are moving to 200, 250, we'll show some data towards the end of the presentation about the yield contest. And then you will see that most of these numbers, they hold true. So we have another publication on plant density. I will leave it there. So if you want to take a look, it summarizes basically all this information connected to plant density response. So Dorivar also discussed about nitrogen, so I will be very brief here. So we have new data looking at nitrogen, and this is a collaboration that we also work with Dorivar. looking at different studies in corn. Here is just showing a trend between the nitrogen demand for corn and the yields. And in many situations, it's also considering the rotation. Okay, in many situations, we never discussed too much about the previous crop. In overall, if you look at the demand for nitrogen in corn, it ranges from 0.66 to 1.23 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. On average, we are closer to 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel in terms of uptake, based on the figure that we have here. And one of the positive effects is that we start detecting in some of the data, more when it's coming from legumes, that they are fixing nitrogen, a positive response, a positive effect of that previous crop, that if we are coming from cereals, then we are not seeing that positive effect. I mean, if you look at the graph, you will see that if it's coming here, for example, after alfalfa, you will see that it tends to have a bump on higher uptake for corn and basically with more yields. So a previous crop is a factor that we need to start to consider. And then for that, we are doing some studies right now, also looking at the previous crop and as effect of the crop in the rotation. We already discussed a little bit about this. I will just give a brief reminder. Changes on nitrogen over time. We talk about this many times. This is some information that is coming from multiple of our studies. It shows that we have more nitrogen coming after flowering for new modern hybrids. And then if you look at the summary, here is a summary that also prepared by Pioneer, but in this case, using one of our studies, you will see that we have an increase on the demand, on the growth of corn, and then that increase basically, it just is supported by the increase in post-flowering uptake. So the nitrogen that we need for corn, it goes up after flowering. So in overall, we are seeing around an increase of 30% of post-flowering nitrogen uptake. And we have detected this in multiple ways. For example, one of our most recent studies, in this case, we compare one of the hybrids from 1990s from Pioneer, and then we compare it with one of the newest ones. And what we found is that if you look at the nitrogen status of the plant, the entire nitrogen status of the plant, we are seeing that the modern hybrids, they usually tend to have a much better nitrogen status, more higher numbers. And then most of the times there is more nitrogen in the upper section of the canopy. So this graph shows that in the upper section of the canopy, above the ear leaf, is a section that these plants are accumulating more nitrogen. They are becoming more efficient. So they have more nitrogen for moving the photosynthesis, carbon, and then increasing yields. So one of the changes of the new hybrids is also connected to this increase in efficiency of allocating nitrogen and basically increasing yields. And then this is a new research data that is showing us that trend on different nitrogen allocation for corn. Now, one of the few points that we will be discussing, just to keep it short, we also talk about the dry down, and specifically why. I will introduce the topic also of the many times we have farmers asking about the phantom yield loss. It's a very kind of a trend topic. But if you look at the dry down, it's very clear that if we look at corn, the dry down usually goes from R5 stage, the early dent, all the way to harvest. In many situations, we have farmers asking the question, when is the optimal time for harvesting? And then there has been questions around talking about this phantom yield loss and when does occur that yield loss. Before we get into that, if you look at the graph here, we have all the grain filling, all the progression of milk-line, what happened to that seed from this moment, R5, all the way to black layer, what we call the maturity, is just changing water by other basically components. That's the main change that we are seeing for corn. It basically at this point, what we are seeing is it goes all the way from 90%, 95% water content to black layer, to maturity. And usually we know this, black layer is around 35% of water content in the kernels. The question is, how long does it take to get all the way from one point to the next? And then how long does it take from black layer to harvest, okay? Here we have some studies where data from the last couple of years from multiple locations. What we did is we have a study, this from one of our PhD students, Javier Fernandez. He went just to the field looking at the corn and then collecting corns every couple of days. And what you are seeing here is just a change in moisture over time. So going all the way from maturity in this graph, all the way to 15.5% commercial harvest. And here, this graph is exactly the same. all the way from maturity to commercial harvest. So if you look at, on average, it took that plant, those two different environments, between 21 and 20 days to go all the way from black layer maturity to harvest. Okay, the questions that we have, we know that basically there is a process or a point here when the cone is getting to 20-25% of moisture. Okay, we are getting very close to the point of basically commercial harvest, is a moment that most of the times we mention that is the optimal to harvest. We usually say that it's around 20-25%, even when we know that the humidity of the grain is high. When the kernel is entering into grain moisture that is between 16-17% and below is when we start seeing potentially losses due basically to potential respiration. And kind of basically what happens to that plant is that it still is drying down, and is losing some of that basically kernel weight, as we mentioned in the previous slide. So going back to this topic of the phantom yield loss, I mean, and it's a topic that is being discussed for multiple years. We know that if we're looking about avoiding any potential problems and any loss, we need to try to target harvested the corn around 20-18%, okay? And if any time that we're going below that numbers, and if we're in a high yielding situations, we start seeing some potential losses of yield connected specifically to kernel weight and problems on respiration for that kernel. So again, I know that many times it's complicated to time this, and then this is one of the examples why we want to continue doing some research on trying to see how well we can time the changes on water content, because most of these changes are connected to weather, nothing else, okay? Humidity, temperature, okay? Those are the key factors connected to dry down. So let me get to something more excited also. This from another PhD student, Rachel Bistra. I mean, she's very popular on social media with all the pictures and information that she shared during the entire growing season. She has been traveling around the entire state during the last 2 years looking at tillers. So for sure, she's the expert. But I will try to convey some of the things that she has been looking on the last couple of years. Here you will see multiple plants with tillers. And you will see, even if you look at this plant, look at the years from the tillers, we have seen situations that they are completely insane in terms of looking at how well those tillers can be productive, okay? So let me go immediately to the situation. So what we are looking on this project, we are looking at 3 different densities, 10, 17, and 24,000 plants per acre, 2 hybrids. And then we are having, in some of these studies, removing the tillers early in the season at B10 or not removing those tillers. We are conducting this the last couple of years, multiple locations. Here you have the entire state with all the locations. And what you will be seeing is that, just to give you an example, here is one example for 2 years, the same location. So what you're seeing on this graph is Garden City, grain yields in bushels per acre, the situation without tillers in the upper graph, and the situation with the tillers. So if you look at this graph, there is almost, I mean, when you look at the ER development, we have 50% or close to 50% of the years that they came from the tillers. And thus the contribution at the similar density, the lower density, 10,000 plants, great contribution from tillers. Again, this is a complex topic. Not all the time the tillers are productive. If you look at Garden City in the lower section, the lower panel, in 2019, we've seen that that situation is not the case. We had it without the tillers and with tillers, basically the same productivity. And in that case, specifically, one of the main factors why we are seeing that the productivity didn't change is because most of the years that they came from the tillers were not lateral years, but they were apical years. And here is a summary. I'm not putting this graph just for everyone to look at the data. I mean, we have multiple locations, but I wanted to just to show the effect of the different type of years. So if you look at all the different locations across the state, when you're going in 10,000 plants is when you start seeing more contribution of lateral years, okay? Those purple colors on the pie chart are the lateral years. When you look at that scenario of low densities is when we have more contribution of tillers producing lateral years and increasing yields, okay? When you look at basically in other locations like Keats, we have basically the green color on the pie chart in this situation, on this graph, is showing that those are their apical years. Those apical years usually are not productive. When you go to 24,000 plants per acre on seed density, you will see that there is almost no contribution of tillers and no contribution, of any lateral to apical years. So again, one of the key factors on tillering is for tillering to be productive and for those tillers to contribute to yield, the lateral years are the key factors. So a few things that we are working right now is to study what are the main factors that are helping to form those lateral years. Just to give you a quick picture of this, and then if you want to know about abnormal cone years, here is the link for getting to this information. We have multiple pictures of abnormal cone years. Here is the difference between a lateral ear and the grains from the lateral ears, if you look at the type of grains, and then here is the difference versus an apical tassel ears. Most of the times, those tassel ears are not productive. So anytime that we have tillers, but we have a lot of formation of tassel ears, those will not be productive, and then that basically the effect of tiller is basically, in many situations, is not negative, but it's not contributing to yields. And then just to close, I want to just close in a more positive note for tonight. And I want to share some of nice information about the high yielding contest. So this is something that we start, Kansas Corn is really leading this, and then we are just helping with some effort from our side. They have been conducting this study for the last 3 years, 2018, 19, 2020, multiple entries. We have entries, and I think that so far the contest has been growing every year from 2018, 2019, 2020. And I invite everyone, and I know that we have excellent farmers connected to this webinar, so I invite everyone not to be shy and make sure you enter your yields. If you look at this, some of these maps, we have some sections of the state like Northwest with very few entries, West Central, Southeast, so you might have a lot of opportunities, and then there are probably a lot of opportunities just to enter and get at least a prize. So I really like the information information coming from farmers. This is not it's not exactly research in controlled conditions. I like it because we can get a lot of insights. So when someone is asking us, what are the main key factors affecting yields? There you go. Planting date. Remember that we talked about planting date, one of the first slides. As we plant earlier, as early we can plant, in many situations, April 15, those are the entries that every year we are seeing a positive trend, okay? High yields, early planting. As we are delaying planting, the yields are going down, okay? Very clear. Seeding rate. We talk about seeding rate and the importance of seeding rate. Similar. Every year we see exactly the same trend. So we are adding data every year to this graph. You will see all the time the same trends. Yields are going up, and most of the times those yields are going up with more seeding rates, okay? And then the other factor, and Dorivar mentioned to this, is nitrogen. So if you look at nitrogen, all the time we are seeing that the yields are going up, and they are dependent on the nitrogen application rate. So if we really want to go and get those high yields, nitrogen fertilization is a key factor for this. And then what we do is also, which is of much of interest for everyone, is looking at different practices. So if someone is interested about what are the key practices that these really high yielding farmers are doing and how they are getting such a good yield, these guys are helping us. They report to us all the information, and this is really helping us to understand how can improve productivity, how can do things in a much better way. High yields are usually coming, early planting date, high density, more nitrogen, good job if you look at pre and post herbicide application all the time, fungicide all the time, okay? If you look at application of other factors, for example, lime, manure. So in many situations we have lime conditions, when we are in a high yielding situations. Interesting enough, we are seeing a different trend here on the tillage, something to analyze. We are seeing that on the high yield, we are seeing farmers not all the time on no-till, but we are seeing some guys doing a strip tillage as another factor that we need to start considering if we're looking for high yields. Most of the farmers looking at basically 30-inch as a basically common practice. Some of the guys on the high yielding there are just testing the 20 inches, which is something that we would like to test. So, but if you want to learn more, this information is already published online. Kansas Corn is planning to get all the new contest winners. Hopefully, I think that information is coming soon, next week. So we'll have all the new contest winners for 2020, and then immediately after, we will start working on putting a new publication for all the information of the 2020 winners, all the management and all the conditions. I took a peek to that information, and I will share that basically these factors, planting date, seeding rate, and nitrogen, they are still there. They are really critical for increasing yields in corn. With that, I will just try to wrap it up, close. Numerous practice to increase yields. As you are seeing, we talk about planting date. We can talk about briefly about tillage, and we are seeing some trends on the yield contest, on the strip till potentially becoming a factor. Crop rotation is a factor, specifically in some of the situations that we are seeing potential interactions with nitrogen, and if we are coming from a legume, a crop that is fixing nitrogen, potential probably bump on the yields. Planting date as early as possible in many situations, as soon as you have good soil temperature, making sure that you have uniform crop, big factor. Seeding rate is always a factor for corn, and it will continue to be a factor. Row spacing, there are some insights there, maybe 20 inch, start looking at high yielding. We know when we are getting to very high yields, I mean, light interception and light quality and number of days during the season could become a factor. So for those scenarios, maybe row spacing is something that we need to start taking a look as some critical factors. And one of the things that I always finish, I will say all the time this, I mean, not all the situations are exactly the same for all the farmers. So these things are changing in particular year and environments. Most of the times, farmers are the best managers to optimize these resources. I mean, I will only just encourage everyone to think about all these practices. We also put together the 2021 corn management. So this is a new publication that you will see the link here. We basically summarize a little bit of this presentation. We have a summary of fertility and weed control and some other topics. So I would invite everyone just to go to that link in KSRE and KSU.edu and just look for these new publications that they are basically a summary of corn management. With that, I will just thanks for your time and for bear with me on this odd night. And then we are ready to take any questions. We have a couple options. I mean, you can put it in the chat, or you can just, I think that maybe this is a good chance and opportunity if you want to use a microphone. We can try that out also too. Let's see. Don't be shy, and if you have any questions, I mean, feel free to use the chat also too, or open up the mic and then ask the question. Let's see. We also have an opportunity. Let me see, there was a question coming here. So the question is, what is planting day is normal for Eastern Kansas? That's a good question, and I will say that is, it depends. I mean, if you look at the Northeast, specifically, I'm thinking about Eastern. If you look at Northeast, I mean, some farmers that are shooting for very high yields, they are trying to get as early as possible. We have a few guys that they are shooting for very high yields, so they usually try to go late March, which probably is too early, or early April, first week of April. I will always say we need to think about very careful, because in corn, uniformity is a big factor. So if you are in Northeast, soil temperature is a big factor. So I would say usually mid-April is, and if you look at the yield contest, most of the entries are around mid-April, April 15, April 10th, April 20th. And usually we get good soil temperature and good uniformity for corn. If you go to the southeast location, which is a very different compared to northeast, some of the farmers there, they usually start quite early for planting, and they try to get the corn planted. Sometimes they start even the last week of March for sure. And by the first week of April, they have probably around 50% of that corn already planted. So of course, there is a big difference on soil temperature in that case. There is another question on row spacing, 30 versus 20 inch yield difference. We have a few studies, and we did a couple years ago a literature review on this question. I would say that in many situations, if we are targeting between 200 bushels and 100 bushels, there is not much difference between 30 to 20 inch. We have a few farmers even in central Kansas that are looking at 15 inch and 20 inch corn. And I think that is more about what is the decision from the farmer based on equipment. If you're looking for high yields, if you're looking for 250 plus, in those situations, and if we are planting a little bit late, then we start seeing some benefits on 20 inch row spacing. So in those situations, yes, we are seeing some benefits. We have another question. Some of the very high yielding corn, have you done any research breaking yields down by elevation? Not really. Not really on that aspect. I mean, what we are seeing for sure is, and that's why we are studying the dry down in some of this previous research, we're seeing that in some cases, what we discussed about the phantom yield loss is something that it happens when the corn is entering around less than 17, 16% of moisture. And then we are seeing potentially, if we are letting the corn to dry down in natural conditions in the field, then we might see some effect of yield loss in those situations. Let me continue. What is the best way to obtain high yields with minimal water? Well, I don't know if that is a very tough question for corn for sure. When you're looking at corn is extremely efficient in using water. And most of the times that efficiency is high when we are in between high yields. There are multiple practices, and many of our farmers are the best stewards of the land, and then we are seeing guys using limited irrigation. I will say if you are thinking about using less water, the timing of the irrigation is the most critical factor. For corn, the timing of irrigation is around 2 weeks before flowering, 2 weeks after. That is the most critical timing for forming yields and protecting that kernel number formation. So it's not about the quantity, but it's also more specifically about the timing and the efficiency. You will get it by just making sure that you use most of that water around early planting to establish the crop and have a good uniformity, and during flowering time. When looking at increasing yields, what is the role of soil type? Can additional water fertility can overcome some of the limitations of soil type? Excellent question. Most of the times, depending on the soil type, if you have a lot of clay content, or if you have a basically impediment on the soil, it's really, really hard. I mean, fertility and water can help mitigate the factors of basically reduce soil profile, depth. But in many situations, I mean, having good infiltration, good movement of water, good fertility are critical. If we have situations like impediments in the soil where the roots cannot go through, or less soil profile, so that basically the roots cannot explore the entire profile, I mean, the fertility, water, for sure, they will be helping to mitigate those effects and to buffer those effects. But at the end of the day, I mean, there will be a limitation for reaching high yields, for sure. In South Central Kansas, we continue to see bacterial leaf streak. What are your observations? Yes, we are seeing more and more of that. I mean, in fact, we are seeing a lot. I mean, we were seeing in South Central Kansas, in Central Kansas. We have reports also from Nebraska. I think that is here, and there is something just to, we need to get used. We need to keep scouting. That's one of the critical aspects. I mean, looking at disease, scouting is the key. Another one, what happens with the weight of the grains on the lateral ears? I mean, excellent question. I show that they are basically, we talk about the tassel ears and the lateral ears. When you're looking at kernel weight, so far, we're seeing that if the lateral ears were very productive, and if you look at the lateral ears We are not seeing much of effect of kernel weight because the corn plant tends to modulate and to adjust very well the kernel weight. We might see potentially more difference that are connected to the final number of kernels in the year between the main plant and the lateral. Do you have any studies on uniformity, spacing, and impact on yield? we have a lot of studies. In fact, if you wait for the next one, in 2 weeks, we'll have Dr. AJ Sharda. We are collaborating with him, so he's doing a lot of on-farm planter technology research. And in those on-farm, we are basically measuring and counting a lot of plants. And uniformity, specifically not about the spacing, but also the timing. When the plants are coming behind, and they're coming many weeks behind, those corn plants, they become more like weeds, and because basically they lag behind and they get to flowering, and they usually tend to finish very unproductive because of the temporal situation. Sometimes we are talking about plants that they come 3 to 4 weeks in some situations, I mean, after the initial plants were coming all together. So, but more information on that, on plant uniformity and spacing, we'll have, I will leave it just so you get Dr. Sharda to shine on those questions. We are losing leaf area to BLS, but it's hard to quantify the effect we are seeing on yield. I mean, that's an excellent question. Anytime that we are losing leaf area in corn is a must, okay? So usually from the research aspect, we talk about leaf area and we say leaf area of 4 or 5 is the way that we quantify leaf area, the amount of green leaf per square meter of soil, okay? I would say that anytime that you're losing leaf area, most likely you will be limiting yields. Do we have any relationship to quantify that very clearly? No, there is not a relationship of saying that if you lose 1 leaf, you lose more yields. I can tell you that anytime that you get closer to lose the ear leaf, okay, the ear leaf is the most productive leaf of the plant, or one of the most productive leaf of the plant. And the photosynthesis and that machine for biomass and carbon fixation and yield is around the ear leaf, okay? Anytime that you are losing some of those big leaves, I will tell you that yes, you are losing yield for sure, okay? And I think that we have one more question. There is a lot of very low rate corn out west that is yielding very well at 10,000 plant density and levels equal to what central Kansas will make 20,000. It will be interesting to see some research on targeting yield rates at elevation. I mean, I think that will be very good. I will tell you that when we were approached to do tillering work and to look at low densities, I was a little bit skeptical. We still need to learn a lot about tillers, okay? And we still need to think about and trying to identify what are the environmental conditions that they trigger a lateral versus a tassel. Because if you get a tassel ear, that's not productive. If you get lateral ears, those are the ones that they will add yields. So, but it's true, and I think that it's also connected to the environment. We are seeing more and more some of the low populations that they are still yielding very well. The problem is that the plasticity or the flexibility of the plant to compensate for low populations is not quite there. We have a figure that if you look at the 10,000, 17,000, and 24,000, the tillers can help you if you have very productive tillers, but only under 10,000, okay? And usually they tend to yield similar to the situation under 17,000, but most of the times 10,000 with tillers is not reaching out to 24,000. So if you have an excellent year, adding more plants and making sure that you have enough plants in the field is still the best strategy. I think southern rust seems to show up many years and takes a leaf area, premature leaf. What is your opinion on best stage of timing of application? Well, that's really tough. I mean, we are seeing southern rust, I mean, coming in multiple situations. I would say, I mean, for me, leaf area and the green leaf for corn is flowering and then flowering to grain filling, because for corn to protect the leaf area is basically the machine for filling the grains. And then at flowering is a moment that we are reaching the potential for that plant. all the leaves are basically green, and most of the leaves of the canopy are doing really well. So if we start seeing some problems, and if we start identifying any southern rust around flowering or early flowering, those basically even 2 to 3 weeks after flowering are critical for basically making sure that we have a good green filling. If not, we will really compromise green filling, and most of the time what will happen to that plant will start to senescence really early, and we will remobilize, and we will start seeing basically that the kernel and grain filling can be compromised. More if we have, on top of these disease problems, stress like water or heat. So far, we haven't seen that in the last couple of years, so let's keep it that drought and heat as much as possible out of our state as we can. I think that I tried to answer all the questions. Hopefully I went through many of all of them. So if you have more questions, feel free to leave those in the chat. We will make sure to put all these recordings together and make sure that we send the questions. I mean, we will be replying to those questions. We'll have your emails. So again, I apologize for the first introduction that we have. I mean, hopefully did I compromise anything? So I appreciate everyone for the help and for being there. And then I think that we are ready to close.
Yeah. Just
Okay, so I will see just to Josh, just to, I think that to do final items and then just to close. Thank you.
Right.
Hey, thanks so much, Ignacio, and thanks everyone that jumped on after those difficulties that we had here. I just wanted to remind everyone, if I can get my slide to advance here. Again, thanks to our sponsors for tonight. And then just want to remind everyone for upcoming events, there's 2 more of these corn schools, but not one next week. Next Thursday will actually be our Kansas Corn Symposium and KCGA annual event, featuring really 2 great speakers in the industry, National Corn Growers Association President, Mr. John Linder, and then the CEO of Growth Energy, Emily Score. So be great to have you join with that. And we'll also have our, on the association side, annual meeting where we'll do some policy updates, look at policy resolutions, and elect new board members. And then again, the next webinar for the corn schools, it will be Thursday, February 4th with Dr. Lancaster and Dr. Sharda. So you can just continue to register online. We will obviously have to create some new Zoom events and make some additional precautions to see if we can prevent that from happening. But once again, thanks for everyone's attention tonight, and sorry for the technical difficulties, but we will catch everyone later. Have a good evening.